do it.
Hi, everyone. You are listening and watching Rashkin Report and then Silicon Curtain, with which I congratulate you and welcome you and ask you to press like and subscribe because, that's what all decent people do these days. They like and subscribe, and if they're really nice, they press that little bell icon because then they know when there's a new video coming out on their favorite channel. You know what to do. Anyway, my name is Yuri, and as my weekly co-host, co-anchor, co-conspirator. There you go. Jonathan Fink.
Co-conspirator, yes. We got to the word at the same time. Co-conspirators, that's it. I'm delighted to be here again, and my audience will be enjoying this, not live, but a little later when I have the chance to upload it.
Tell us about where you are. I mean, that's a great backdrop.
See, just probably over there, that's the so-called Mother of Parliaments. This building here is Westminster. It's quite a sort of special bit of architecture there. This is the only dry and quiet place I could find in this part of central London. I can't guarantee that it won't absolutely, the heavens might open up at any point, but fingers crossed we get through it without getting drenched.
Indeed. Well, everyone, you can join in by crossing fingers, and we will just begin. Jonathan, there's so much to talk about this week, and it seems like we should, as responsible people in the United States, send our thoughts and prayers to family of Charlie Kirk. And we will talk about what that means a little later as far as what that murder means for the United States and perhaps the world. But I feel like we need to start with attack by Russia on Poland, which is, last I checked, a NATO country, which, last I checked, is supposed to have some consequences. What do you see?
Well, what those consequences are. I mean, Poland immediately declared an Article 4, which means, they have some great concerns about the violation of their sovereign territory. It means they're calling upon allies to start to take some steps. Those steps are not defined, obviously, within that. And at the moment, I don't think we're seeing steps that are going to worry the Kremlin at all. If we assume that this was intentional, and I think the evidence is certainly pointing in that direction, then one would expect that it sends certain signals, and that the Kremlin will be looking out for what those signals might be. And the failure by the Western Alliance is one of the things they will be monitoring closely. Now, this works whether this strike was intentional or not. I think this is the bit people are missing. The Kremlin is going to be reading the signals, whether it intentionally sent those drones over or not. It gives them valuable information about the will and capacity of the allies. In particular, they're going to be looking for the reaction of the United States. Does the United States heavily come and back Europe and Poland especially? Or are they simply going to shrug and go, you know what, this is Europe's problem? Why would Russia have picked Poland? Well, it's because Alexander Stubb of Finland and various, especially conservative politicians in Poland have the closest relationship to Trump of any Europeans. The only ones who can, in some ways, sneak narratives into his brain that counteract the disinformation he's getting from right-wing influencers. So if Trump shrugs, does a big sort of so what to his most, I would say, obsequious and ardent allies in Europe, that basically means he's written Europe off. Not to, pull my punches here, but they're going to be looking for that kind of signal.
I think what I'm really concerned about is not the U.S. reaction, which to me is very clear. It's nothing. Like when our president writes, "Here we go." What is this? Like, let's get some popcorn. Get out of popcorn. This is going to be something like the show's about to begin. That's not what you do if you're a member of a NATO country and this is your production. But
It's like the
you
big fight. Hey, the big fight starting. Let's all get
know, right,
on the
right,
squishy
exactly.
sofa and
Yay! It's crazy, but what I'm watching is more European response because I said this right away, and I think Zelensky said something similar, which is important to see now what signal is received by NATO countries in Europe. Because are they going to say, wow, this means we need to help Ukraine even more? Or is it going to say, ooh, everybody forget about Ukraine, we got to protect our butts? That's what I'm trying to
well,
discern.
I mean, the other idea here. I mean, there's two interesting responses here, or there's two interesting things that could come about. One is Europe could turn in on itself and say, do you know what? We're now under threat. So I'm sorry, Ukraine, we have to focus on our own security now. That is maybe one of the downsides of this. It also demonstrates, as one of my experts said this morning, the completing capability of Europe. So Poland experienced a fraction of the drones that Ukraine has to deal with nightly, and they scrambled F-35s, which is not an efficient way to take drones out. You're talking about munitions that are worth tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. You're talking about planes that cost tens of thousands of dollars for every hour they're in the sky to shoot down drones that cost hundreds, if not a few thousand apiece. So there's a huge, disparity in the response we were able to mount compared to the cost outlay. So that's going to delight the Kremlin. If we if we buckle down and say, okay, we've got to focus on Europe first, then that's going to be disastrous as well. The correct response, of course, will be to say, okay, Ukraine is the front line of European defense and pile in to create the equivalent of a kind of no-fly zone in Ukraine. That is the appropriate response. And that's maybe the only robust response that the Kremlin will pay attention to. Everything else is just fluff.
What impact do you feel it has in Europe that United States? Do you think that there is a clear understanding that there is no guarantee of security as long as Trump is president of the United States? Or is there some hope that the United States will follow its obligations and therefore things are not as bad as they might seem?
I think, from what I hear, European leaders are really maybe a little bit, I guess we can't call it schizophrenic, but they're accepting both realities at the same time. I think European leaders, I'm told, do understand that this is a very precarious position and help may not be coming from the US. At the same time, they're engaged in a massive effort of Trump management in the hope that it can be talked around. And I think that hope, that clinging to hope, is perhaps delaying more strategic decisions and organization. And this is a classic move by Russia. Rather than not wanting to push Europeans one way or the other, Russia decides to really test the limits, really go to town. Okay, let's see how far we push them to see whether we can upset that weird paradigm of we're on our own, but we're still waiting for the US to come to our rescue. Let's see how far we can push that, because that'll tell us what we can do next, what we should test next. It will tell them ultimately whether they can invade sovereign European territory and get away with it. I think that's going to be the ultimate test, is a full Article 5 challenge. And these are stepping stones towards that point.
But is Putin looking to make one-off, just kind of a terrorist attacks, which just intimidate and try to push Europe away from helping Ukraine? Or do you think that Putin is capable of multiple fronts, of multiple wars? I was thinking that if he wants to go against Finland, against whom Soviet Union already lost a war, perhaps he could also start a war against Japan, against Russia, also lost a war. And they could just kind of build a coalition of all these, losing wars that Russia is engaged in. Can Putin afford, in your opinion, to do anything other than just threaten?
I mean, of course, it's a fallacy to think that this war is going to resemble the previous war, or 1905, or 1914, or 1939. In reality, I think it's going to have, if he can help to turn Europe into a mosaic where each country is thinking about its interests first, as opposed to the collective will, and some of them are direct agents of the Kremlin. Some of them are ruled by politicians who see advantage by taking the Kremlin's money, but still publicly maybe denying that. Then he'll be able to break up that alliance. He doesn't need everyone to be on his side. He just needs to prevent the idea that there's a common truth and a common alliance. And if NATO fails to come to the defense of a country that has its sovereignty violated, then NATO's done. If all that happens, if let's say a chunk of Finland is taken, some uninhabited scrubland, or he violates the Suwalki Gap or something, if the reaction is that Europe does not mobilize to come to their support, then he also knows that the European Union is well on the way to being finished as well. So he doesn't need the kind of maximal victory in a Second World War style. He just needs an ever increasing set of escalations to be underplayed and not reacted to.
So, general undermining of alliances could be a sufficient goal for Putin at this time.
Yeah. And then he picks them off one by one as one state after another adopts the authoritarian toolkit, the Trumpian toolkit, and moves away from democracy. He knows that's not going to happen all at once. It's not going to happen in all the countries. But if he can break Europe up into a mosaic of quasi-supportive, fully supportive, and isolated states, then he's won. Because the idea of collective security, collective defense, collective wealth creation is over. And then whether it's over years or decades or up to his successor, he can then really, pick countries off one by one, use immigration to weaponize. He's in bed with many of the far right, ultra conservative forces around the world, and the tendency is moving that direction. So I don't think it necessarily has to be a full kinetic invasion, which they've showed they're not particularly good at in Ukraine. He may achieve his purposes through other hybrid, tactics of divide and conquer.
But what if NATO is dead? What if, with Hungary in it and United States under Donald Trump, NATO, as it was envisioned by its founders, is dead? There's still need for collective deterrence and for collective defense and working together to stand up against the Russian threat. And that's where the coalition of the willing I find so fascinating, because on one hand, it's not Rammstein, because we have now only 26 countries. On the other hand, we have 26 countries. But on the third hand, exactly which 26 countries are they? Because I couldn't find a list, because there's a few that are mentioned, but most of them are really quiet about them being on this alliance. So is there need for, and what is the state of efforts do you feel at this point for forming a functional alliance that's going to be working together for the countries that see and understand the Russian threat equally, at the same level, that maybe, I don't know, Portugal doesn't find this to be a problem, but all the Baltic states and Finland and Sweden and Ukraine do?
I mean, I've been arguing, and I haven't got too many experts to agree with this, for the last 2 years, that Putin doesn't need to shut NATO down. In fact, and nor does Trump. But a costly thing to do. And of course, alternative alliances will spring up like mushrooms to take its place. All you need to do is to turn it into a zombie institution, an ineffective institution. And actually, it's much better if you keep the illusion of it going. I mean, anyone who knows their Harry Potter, to use a popular analogy, um, he didn't make himself into Minister of Magic. He didn't shut the Ministry of Magic down because you want to create the ambiguity that these institutions still function, but actually you control them. That is what he's done in Russia. He didn't shut the Duma down. He just made sure that it was entirely controlled. But you still create, the illusion of plurality. You still create the illusion of being in a hybrid autocracy when you're actually in a full one. So it serves his purposes, and I think it serves Trump's purposes to have a weakened, emasculated, um, highly managerial NATO that is still constantly chasing around trying to get Trump's approval, whereas what it already has become is a hollow facade.
Well, that seems like we're going back to hybrid warfare, where Russia isn't really, except for Ukraine and in this case Poland, crossing the borders so much and presents military danger as it is just poking, death by 1,000 cuts, where Russia eventually gains a lot of leverage.
Well, this is it. And I think this, I mean, it's called salami slicing. And we've been aware of this tactic for many decades. Um, and there's a famous comedy program, Yes, Yes Minister, Yes Prime Minister, where they describe this salami slicing. At what point would you launch a nuclear strike against Moscow? Um, is it when they're here? Is it when they're there? Is it when they're crossing the channel? At what point do you trigger your maximalist? Um, the answer to that is you never do if it's done in a surreptitious hybrid salami slicing kind of way. We know from Putin that he is quite indecisive, but he is rather good, or at least he has advisors who understand the potential effects of using this sort of hybrid strategy to distract and confuse, etc. The question for me becomes, this is one back to you, and then I'd love to learn your views on what the Charlie Kirk does to America if it's going to turn in on itself, and really what's going on in the outside world is going to be less important. Um, but yeah, um, lost my train of thought there. But
It
I
says it
think I
won't
think
be playing,
Putin
but not
has
play.
to act. I mean, Putin has to act. He's got a small window. Let's assume that Trump doesn't co-opt and go for a third term or win a third term. Then he has a small window in which to act. And there may be, maybe, some more accountability, or at least some kind of, you know, roadblocks in the way of Trump's authoritarian slide.
Well, we will be observing that. I guess a couple of words about what's happening with Charlie Kirk murder is that we have, of course, this is a multi-level story, starting, I suppose, from the fact that director of FBI announced that we caught the person, to then announcing that suspect was released because we're still looking, and so currently there's a manhunt underway. And this is somebody who blend in with the crowd. He made a shot and then he jumped and it sounds like from a roof and blend in with the crowd. Now, I lived in Utah where this took place in Salt Lake for like 15, 16 years. First, when I came to the United States, that's the place where my formative years were spent in Utah. And this university is what used to be a college, and then they've upgraded themselves to university. And that's not one of the, I mean, you can say it's top, but it's Utah is a very, I would say, white place to begin with. And you have a crowd that was attending this debate. That was overwhelmingly friendly crowd. This was not a group of people. He was not meeting a hostile group. He was in a very friendly setting. And nonetheless, whoever killed him apparently looked like one of the people that was present there, and therefore blended in the crowd. Then there is the level of expressing our deep sorrow for murder, for abhorrent violence. and expressing that clearly, so it's unambiguous, and at the same and then showing extending also it to his wife and his kids. I mean, it's a terrible situation. And then there's this next level where we go, what did this person do? And we realize that he was spreading hate, and to the point that when I look at my social media, I see a mix of people who are abhorred by the violence and people who are abhorred by what he did. And that is, there's in Russian culture, there's an example of Kirov. In German culture and with fascists, there's another example of another person who was killed, and that was like a fire of Reichstag, something that was that tipping point where a situation went into a new level. And it's impossible, I think, at this point to say, but we see that we have a very aggressive president. We see that he's got a very aggressive ideology, and fundamentally, I feel that when people lose belief and lose faith in their ability to enact change democratically, this is where violence comes in. This is where it's so important for people to always have faith in the elections, and that through these legitimate ways we can affect change, even if we don't like something that's happening now. And through the level of hate that was brought by Charlie Kirk, through level of and he is not alone. But so that's another level. And then we find out that his widow was actively engaged in this work with him. So feelings are very mixed. It's impossible to tell exactly how the situation is going to develop. But hopefully, and of course, there's also a level of gun violence. Because the weapon, carrying this weapon was technically legal on this college campus, because in Utah, it's concealed carry, you can do that. And we're always looking at another, at the same time that there was that shooting, there was a shooting in a Colorado school that was almost, forgotten or ignored because of this much louder, much more noticeable political, essentially, assassination. And it's a crisis in the United States on many, many levels, and we're trying to figure out what we're going to do. And that's when we see our president come out and say, "Oh, it's the Democrats," and really just,
Yes.
people are asking
Immediately as well.
Yeah, it's on some level insane, because how can a president politicize a tragedy like this? But it's impossible for him to think otherwise, evidently. And of course, there's an answer, always a political answer, and it's where are the reforms about the guns? Charlie Kirk was a huge defender of the Second Amendment, but which gives people right to bear arms in the United States. And again, this is going to be politicized in a way that doesn't even probably make sense at this moment, because it's going to be used by somebody for their own ends and means. Today is 9/11. And we saw how that terrible, terrible tragedy of that day, could somebody have predicted on 11th of September or even 12th that we're going to be in Iraq for like 10 or 20 years, and that all of that is going to follow? No, because when we have a crisis, we have political leaders that use that crisis to achieve their own means, to achieve their own goals. And so it's a little bit intimidating, frankly, to think about what could be the goals of this administration and how they're going to use this tragedy to achieve their goals by whatever means.
And that was the sentiment which we were discussing last night. I did a live stream with a friend of mine who's a sort of atheist philosopher and a very pro-Ukraine supporter, and we were saying, is this going to be like, the Reichstag fire or a sort of Kristallnacht moment, which is, it's the point at which the administration realizes it has impunity and really starts to flex its muscles. This is the point at which they use a crisis as an excuse. And of course, that first phrase, and this is very reminiscent of how Russia attacks, it's very reminiscent of what we saw in the 1930s, is the weaponization of grievance. So the first thing you do is accuse your opponent of the thing that you're doing. You come out and say, how dare the Democrats politicize this issue? How dare you And then you make that mental leap. Well, if they're politicizing it, then they must be responsible for it. Whereas in actual fact, it's the environment of hate, it's the divisive environment, it's the confrontational environment, it's the environment where rule of law is being degraded and where rhetoric has become off the scale with Trump. Um, Not just the sort of lies, the incessant, relentless lies, but also the rhetoric, which has been extremely violent. I mean, I actually remember the first campaign in 2016, and I remember the stuff when it was first considered taboo, and he was breaking those taboos on a daily basis. No, this environment has been created by the current administration. They're fully aware of it, but they're also fully positioned to take advantage of it. I mean, my concern here, and actually someone just quoted to me what Charlie Kirk said about Zelensky's, one of his trips to the White House. And it was something along the lines of, go away, we don't care about you. I mean, it was utterly heartless and shameless. Um, and you're responsible for the deaths of 1 million people, go away. I think it's something along those lines. Um, the thing is, if you point out these points of reality, then you're accused of weaponizing it. But when the other side genuinely weaponize these issues, that's fine. You can't call that out. I think it seems to me very dangerous, but also seems to me the point at which the US might become fully introverted. The point at which Putin might think, haha, this is another this is another inflection point for me to potentially accelerate plans we might have had for provocation. Same with Xi. Look, the US is distracted. The US is not looking outward at this point. Okay, let's see how that fits with the timing of our long-term stepping stones towards full provocation.
It seems like it always comes down to, I will say that to people, especially in my Russian language space, who are already pointing fingers at Russia for murder of Charlie Kirk, I really don't think so. Whatever we're going to find out, I'm really, it's like people who were thinking that Putin poisoned Trump in Alaska. Like, I really don't think so. So sometimes certain things need to be
It's
pointed
the
out.
same as, it's the same as, they sent Putin's double. And there's actually quite a few serious commentators who actually made videos about how Putin sent his double to Alaska. I really do not think that's the case. But when people are desperate, they go down these rabbit holes. It's not necessarily helpful at all. And of course, as we point out with the drones, yes, it's highly likely that Russia sent them. In some ways, it doesn't matter because they can manipulate that situation, whether they were fully behind it or not. Well, they were clearly behind it, whether it was intentional or not. And they can manipulate this as well. They don't have to instigate events in order to benefit from them.
How do you see Trump's behavior with Lukashenko as something that is, as I was asked, perhaps a way to pull Belarus away from Russia? Or is this just down that big slippery slope of Donald Trump joining all the dictators and legalizing them and legitimizing them, and that's how it's going to look like? Because he's looking at, I think, citizens as their subjects, his royal subjects. And Lukashenko has subjects, and they traded some subjects in exchange for some sanctions, and there you go. It seems very like trying to do a certain maneuver with a certain goal in mind. That's what it looks to me. How does it look to you?
Well, I was chastised very, very slightly this morning when I made the assertion to an expert who knows a lot more than I do that Belarus has no agency whatsoever, is essentially a puppet of the Kremlin. He said, "Well, you have to be a little bit careful there. Um, they will have agency in certain areas, and let's not forget that Putin already tried to pressure Belarus into fully joining in his special military operation. And the pushback from the Belarus army was such that they didn't go further. So Belarus does have some agency. However, there are other commands that will come from the Kremlin, which they'll look at it and go, okay, can we push back? Can we not push back? So I think there will be a consideration of, what must we do? What do we want to do? And what can we, feasibly push back on? We don't know how those conversations go down. Um, it may also be part of an operation. Some of these drones came from Belarus. Um, we know that the Zapad drills are ongoing at the moment. For those who don't know what Zapad is, I think most of your audience does, some of mine won't. It means the West, which tells you everything you need to know there. And it was the Zapad drills in 2021 that essentially allowed them to, on paper and publicly, they were saying, there's going to be 13,000 troops involved. In the end, there were 200,000, and that was a precursor to the full-scale invasion. We don't know who's gathering. So whether Zapad is just, they're just testing capabilities, and then they're using Belarus to create some kind of plausible deniability smokescreen, who knows? I mean, these are all options.
I was asked in an interview, it was cited to me that Belarus is building all sorts of fortifications and strengthening its military installations. And what could that possibly mean? I mean, that's kind of above my pay scale, but that's something that was mentioned to me.
Yes, I mean, it could just be regime paranoia. It's this argument that NATO is aggressive and they got it. Yeah, that NATO's got it in for us, etc. On the one hand, it. On the other hand, this is an extremely paranoid regime, and it's run by paranoid people who believe in the exceptionalism of Russia and who believe that Russia has been the eternal victim of history. And they manage to keep these contradictory thoughts in their head at the same time. Just because it makes sense to us, or even any logical sense if you were to parse it out, doesn't mean they can't simultaneously believe that they are victims of the West, but also superior to the West. Um, so this just could be sheer paranoia that they think, NATO might mount an invasion. Um, Interestingly, there's also these accusations that have popped up that the Finnish government has been overtaken by Nazis, and that Finland is planning to invade Russia. Anyone who's been to Finland will know your average Finn will be like, no, thank you. We don't want any of that stuff. Thank you very much. We don't even want the territories that you stole off us because they were beautiful when you stole them. And now they are a morass of, they're just sort of horrible. They're ruined. So Finland does not want, even if its own, lost sovereign territories back. But you have to wonder, is this a provocation, or are there people in the regime paranoid enough to believe that this might actually be the case?
Well, we know that Trump sent Lukashenko some cufflinks, and it's like for island of Manhattan, there were some glass beads exchanged, and so Trump sent Lukashenko some cufflinks, and Lukashenko said that he shall send something back. So it's dictators. It's a different world, Jonathan. Let me ask you. I think this conversation.
It's just
Yeah.
check it for bugs and toxins. That's all I'd say.
Absolutely, yes. They'll crash those cufflinks just to make sure they're safe. But there was a big story in Wall Street Journal that came out earlier, and it's not the one about Epstein case, but it's about the strategy that, depending on how you look at it, whether it's Putin's strategy or Ukraine's strategy, but strategy being that Ukraine has an army that is a finite resource, and Russia has an economy that's kind of a finite resource as well, in a sense that it could, crash and run out of his ability to finance the war. And which one is going to end first? And that Putin is essentially betting that he will outlast Ukrainian army. And I think Ukrainian army is betting that they will outlast Putin's economy. How do you see this equation? Is this a right way to look at it? And how do you see it?
This is the way I've looked at it almost since the start of the war. I had a conversation with Ben Hodges back in autumn of 2022, where we basically said that if the West continues with the hesitancy it's shown, then what we've got here is a struggle to the bottom almost to see who will crumble first. Not a traditional victory of the mightiest, but essentially, who will not have the stamina to keep going the longest. So I think that has been absolutely clear for 3 years. Um, and the West has both simultaneously done more than many predicted, but it's done a lot less than it ought to have done. And certainly it's never aligned behind a Ukrainian victory. At the same time, Ukraine has done phenomenal and extraordinary things, and in other areas, um, it has not done quite so well. So, for obvious reasons, it has not fully mobilized its population and its resources. Um, on the other hand, civic society has stepped up in a way which no one could conceive of. The innovation has been extraordinary in certain regiments, Third Assault, Azov, and others, and some of the unmanned systems forces. Extraordinary people and innovations. On the other hand, they've lost so many people who were at Maidan and who were the sort of, I would say, the leaders of society. And they have not been able to fully reform some of the Soviet thinking within the more traditional infantry battalions. So this still remains. I think these innovations have allowed Ukraine to keep going, but not allow because it's not reached a hold of being able to command certain things, like maneuver warfare, which many of the experts on my channel talk about. At the same time, Russia has been catastrophic in much of what it's done, as some who know it and weren't deluded by their propaganda could have predicted. But unfortunately, as with the Soviet Union, it's got pockets of excellence. And generally, the sheer brutality has allowed it to marshal resources and keep the rest going. And there's been no serious dissent, really, from the Kremlin, apart from the 23 when a lot of people left. So it's still a race to the bottom. It's still to see who will crumble last. My money is on Russia crumbling well before Ukraine runs out of resource and willpower, irrespective of what Trump and the West do. Simply because it seems to me the tendency is going that way. The economy is in such a dire state that even regime loyalists are pointing it out. It seems that Solovyov is now swinging between, genocidal triumphalism and aggression and downright depression, where, the world is over, woe is me kind of stuff. So I think there's a general awareness that something is going to break, but no one knows where or when. I don't get the impression in Ukraine that it's on the cusp of any catastrophic collapse. I just don't get that impression, even though the price of defending its borders and freedom is horrifically high.
And I think one of the reasons that I feel optimistic about Ukraine's chances also is all the weapons that Ukraine is now making itself. That they are, they received the signal from Washington so clearly, and they had time over the last 3 years, almost 4 years, to really put themselves in a much better position. And it's actually, to be honest, so has Russia. And both of these states have kind of remodeled of how warfare is now going to be fought going forward. With the drones, with artificial intelligence and all of that stuff, it almost feels like we're getting close to Terminator.
Yes.
Where
yes.
like it's time to send somebody back and get this straightened out. But that's, and I remember a conversation that I had with General Hodges as well. And what he said that was so memorable to me, that Putin is trading people for time. And and he is fine with losing however many people in the mid grinder of war to get the time, and the time he needed really to get Donald Trump in place. And so Trump is there, but it turns out that Trump is limited. He can provide pressure. He can be hard to manage. He can be weird and all sorts of things. But in the end, it's Ukraine that is standing across, like a bone in their throat, and is not allowing either, Russia and Putin and Trump to kind of merge into this embrace that they're aiming for. So I think because Ukraine can't afford to surrender, that's something
This
that
is
I
it.
think is very clear.
That's absolutely right. And, I said this quite early on in the war. Putin is trading thousands of gallons of blood for every drop of his own. He's literally expending this because he wants to seal his place in the history book, and he wants to save his skin and his ill-gotten gains. And I think there's really little other depth that you require to understand the situation. The problem we've got is that Russia has no mechanism of succession and no mechanism of opposition. None at all. And for those who, quote Navalny and whatever,
Wait a minute. There
for all
is a
his
method.
heroism.
I'm sorry, but there is a method of succession. It's called FSB Collegium or whatever, and then they get
Yes.
together.
Oh, yeah. Which no one's ever penetrated to the FSB Collegium. No one knows. I mean, I'm thinking of that scene in Spectre, James Bond, where they're all sitting around at the table and one of them gets whacked and no one, no one shifts a muscle in response. It's probably a room with no windows, otherwise no one would turn up.
The only thing we know for sure is
who knows?
in that room there's no windows. That's right.
Yeah, it's all on the first floor, and no tea and sushi are served. And and if they offer you a change of underpants, don't put them on. But to the point with ineffective Russian opposition, you only have to look at Yulia Navalny's latest post today. So Poland is penetrated by 20 to 23 drones. She posts that she's very concerned that tourist visas are going to be cancelled for Russians. Really? Really? Is that your biggest concern? Fighting for a privilege, and in many cases, an unearned privilege? Really? So there's, and I think many in the West overestimated the potential for internal dissent to topple Putin. And even now, they're underestimating two things. They're underestimating, I would say, the support actually that Putin has for this operation still, and they're underestimating Ukraine. Russia's about to throw over 100,000 troops at Pokrovsk, probably with very little result. If those were thrown at a Western city, I'm told by some military experts, well, they could probably overrun the Baltics with a similar amount of troops, or a large Western European city. In Ukraine, they can barely even take a small town, which has been reduced to a pile of rubble. So we underestimate the extraordinary accomplishment of the Ukrainian army at keeping Russia at bay.
Yeah, and I wonder what will be, if there will be any real consequences for Yulia Navalny's attempt at getting involved in this conversation, because at what point is Russian opposition going to kind of send enough wrong messages where this is going to backfire on them in Europe?
No one cares. No one cares. I'm in London today, and some friends of mine are just up the road at the Royal Opera House protesting because Anna Netrebko, an ardent supporter of Putin and indeed the invasion, is performing at the Royal Opera House up the road. Shit. Sorry for the language. Even here, and Britain is the most ardent supporter of Ukraine. Unfortunately, Russian sport, Russian culture, literature, all the sort of soft power, which actually they use as hard power, it still has sway here. And I would see Navalny as part of that hard power. Right? She's not part of the regime. I don't believe she's part of the regime. And yet she is still, I would say, enhancing Russian imperialism on the world stage with no real pushback or examination of what she says and does. So, don't hold out much hope there that should be held to account.
Enhancing imperialism. I love hearing it coming from London, from Great Britain, from capital of a British Empire. It sounds fantastic.
The
You know who
capital of the
wanted
British
now.
Empire.
Right.
Uh,
That's great.
I mean, our
John,
empire was different, right? No, I'm not even. I'm not even going to get into that.
Jonathan, thank you so much
Our
for.
empire did some terrible, terrible things.
See, you're just you're so not Russian. You're supposed to say our empire is great. It does great things. It brings great culture to people and dance ballet monkeys.
Great British culture. Yeah.
Jonathan, thank you so much for your time. Thank you to everyone who took the time to spend it with us. Press like and subscribe for Silicon Curtain and Rashkin Report in English. Thank you and take care.